A Man in the Abyss by Jack London. After a momentary silence spake some vessels of a more ungainly make. They sneered me for leaning all the wry. What did the handwin of a potter shake? Omar Khayyam. I say, can you let a lodging? Whose words I discharged carelessly over my shoulder the stout and elderly woman, of whose fare I was partaking in a greasy coffee house down near the pool and not very far from Limehouse. Oh yes, she answered shortly, my appearance possibly not approximating the standard of affluence required by her house. I said no more, consuming my rasher of bacon and the pint of sickly tea in silence. Nor did she take further interest in me till I came to pay my reckoning, 4 pence, when I pulled all of 10 shillings out of my pocket. The expected result was produced. "Yes, sir," she at once volunteered. "I've nice lodgings you'd like take fancy to, back from a voyage, sir." "How much for a room?" I inquired, ignoring her curiosity. She looked me up and down with frank surprise. I don't let rooms, not to my regular lodgers, much less casuals. "When I have to look along a bit," I said with marked disappointment. But the sight of my 10 shillings had made her keen. "I can let you have a nice bed with 2 other men," she urged. "Good, respectable men, and steady." "But I don't want to sleep with 2 other men," I objected. "But I have to. There's 3 beds in the room, and it's not a very small room." "How much?" I demanded. "half a crown a week, 206 to a regular lodger, with fancy for men, I'm sure. One works in the Warhorse, and Anne's been with me 2 years now, and Warhorse been with me 6 years, so in 2 months, come next Saturday. He's a skein shifter," she went on, "a steady, respectable man, never missing a night work in the time's been with me. And he's like the house. He says it's the best he can do, and the ways of lodgings, I bought him, and the other lodgers too." "I suppose he's saving money right along," I insinuated innocently. "Bless you, no. How can he do as well elsewhere with his money?" And I thought of my own spacious West, with room under its sky and unlimited air for 1,000 Londons. And here was this man, a steady and reliable man, never missing a night's work, frugal and honest, lodging in one room with 2 other men, paying $2.50 per month for it, and out of his experience adjudging it to be the best he could do. And here was I, on the strength of the 10 shillings in my pocket, able to enter in with my rags and take up my bed with him. The human soul is a lonely thing, but must be very lonely sometimes when there are 3 beds to a room, and councils with 10 shillings, I admitted. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 13 years, sir. And don't you think you'll fancy the lodging?" While she talked, she was shuffling ponderously about the small kitchen in which she cooked the food for lodgers who were also boarders. When I first entered, she had been hard at work, nor had she let up once throughout the conversation. Undoubtedly, she was a busy woman. Up at 5:30, to bed the last thing at night, working fit her drop, 13 years of it, and for reward grey hairs, frowsy clothes, stooped shoulders, slatternly figure, unending toil and fool, and noisome coffee house that faced on an alley 10 feet between the walls, and a waterside environment that was ugly and sickening to say the least. "You'll be in haggling to have a look?" she questioned wistfully as I went out of the door. And as I turned and looked at her, I realized to the full the deeper truth and underlying that very wise old maxim, "Virtue is its own reward." I went back to her. "Have you ever taken a vacation?" I asked. "Vacation?" "A trip to the country for a couple of days, fresh air, a day off, at rest." "No, Lums," she laughed, for the first time stopping from her work. "Vacation, eh? Oh, likes of me. Just fancy now, mind your feet." This laughed sharply, and to me, as I stumbled over a rotten threshold. Down near the West India dock I came upon a young fellow staring disconsolately at the muddy water. A fireman's cap was pulled down across his eyes, and the fit and sack of his gloves whispered unmistakably of the sea. "Hello, mate," I greeted him, sparing for a beginning. "Can you tell me the way to Wapping?" "Work your way over in the cattle boat," he countered, fixing my nationality on the instant. And thereupon we entered upon a talk that extended itself to a public house and a couple of pins of arf and arf. This led to closer intimacy, so that when I brought to light all of a shilling's worth of coppers, ostensible my all, and put aside 6 pence for a bed and 6 pence for more arf and arf, he generously proposed that we drink up the whole shilling. My mates cut up rough last night," he explained, "and the bobbies got 'em so you can bunk and we me what you say." I said yes, and by the time we had soaked ourselves in a whole shilling's worth of beer and slept the night on a miserable bed in a miserable den, I knew him pretty fairly for what he was, and that in one respect he was representative of a larger body of a lower-class London workman my later experience substantiates. He was London-born, his father a fireman and a drinker before him. As a child, his home was the streets and the docks. He had never learned to read and had never felt the need for it. A vain and useless accomplishment, he held, at least for a man of his station in life. He had a mother and numerous squalling brothers and sisters, all crammed into a couple of rooms and living on poorer and less regular food when he could orderly rustle for himself. In fact, he never went home except at periods when he was unfortunate in procuring his own food. Petty pilfering and begging along the streets and docks, a trip or two to sea as mess boy, a few trips more as coal trimmer, and then a full-fledged fireman, he had reached the top of his life. And in the course of this he had also hammered out the philosophy of life, an ugly and repulsive philosophy, but withal a very logical and sensible one from his point of view. When I asked him what he lived for, he immediately answered, "Booze. A voyage to sea, for men must live and get the wherewithal, and then the paying off and the big drunk at the end. After that, little drunks sponge in the pubs for mates with a few coppers left, like myself, and when sponging was played out, another trip to sea and a repetition of a beastly cycle." "But woman," I suggested, when he had finished proclaiming booze without end of existence. "Women?" He thumped his pot upon the bar and orated eloquently. "Women is the thing my addiction has learned me to let alone. I don't pay, matey, I don't pay. What's men like me want with women, eh? Just you tell me. How's my ma, she was enough, for banging the kids about and making me all men miserable when they come home, which was seldom my grant. And for what? Because ma, she didn't make it home happy, that was why. And where's the other woman? All of which treat a poor sucker with a few shillings in his trousers. A good drunk is what's got in its pockets. A good long drunks, and the women skim him out of his money so quick he ain't that hardly a glass. And now I've had my flings in it, and now what's what? And I tell you, where's women is trouble, scratching, canning, fighting, cutting, bobbies, making strides, and a morning's hard labor bag of it all, and no payday when you come out. But a wife and children, I insisted, a home of your own and all of it. Think of it, back from a voyage, little children climbing on your knee, and the wife happy and smiling, and a kiss for you when she lays table, and a kiss all round from the babies when they go to bed, and the kettle singing, and the long talk afterward of where you've been, what you've seen, and of her, and all the little happenings at home while you've been away, and "Garn!" he cried, with a playful shove of his fist on my shoulder. "What's your name, eh? And Mrs. Kisses, and kids climbing, and kittles singing, all of 4 points a month when you have a ship, and for nothing being fined. I tell you what you get on 4 points, and Mrs. Row and kids squalling in the cold, make the kettle sing, and a kettle up the spout, that's what I get. And I have to make a block bloomin', we're glad to be back and see. And Mrs. What for? To make you miserable. Kids, just take me counsel, Matin, and don't have them. Look at me, I can have my beer when I like, and a blends and Mrs. and kids a crying for bread. And maybe I am, with my beer and mates like you, on a good ship coming and another trip to sea. I say, let's have another pint. Half an hour's good enough for me." Without going further with the speech of this yellow fellow of 22, I think I have sufficiently indicated his philosophy of life and the underlying economy reason for it. How life he had never known. The word home aroused nothing but unpleasant associations. In the low wages of his father and of other men in the same walk in life, he found sufficient reason for branding wife and children as encumbrances and causes of masculine misery. An unconscious hedonist, utterly unmoral and materialistic, he sought the greatest possible happiness for himself and found it in drink. A young sot, a premature wreck, physical, inable to do a stoker's work, the gutter or the workhouse, and the end, he saw it all as clearly as I, but it held no terrors for him. From the moment of his birth, all the forces of his environment had tended to harden him, and he viewed his wretched, inevitable future with a coldness and unconcern I could not shake. And yet he was not a bad man. He was not inherently vicious and brutal. He had normal mentality and a more than average physique. His eyes were blue and round, shaded by long lashes and wide apart, and there was a laugh in them and a fund of humour behind. The brow and general features were good, the mouth and lips sweet, were already developing a harsh twist. The chin was weak, but not too weak. I have seen men sitting in the high places with weaker. His head was shapely, and so gracefully was it poised upon a perfect net that I was not surprised by his body that night when he stripped for bed. I've seen many men strip in gymnasium and training quarters, men of good blood and upbringing, but I have never seen one who stripped to better advantage than this young sot of 22, this young god doomed to wreck and ruin in 4 or 5 short years, and to pass hence without posterity to receive the splendid heritage it was his to bequeath. It seemed sacrilege to waste such life, and yet I was forced to confess that he was right in not marrying on £4.10 in London town. Just as the scene shifter was happier in making both ends meet in a room shared with 2 other men than he would have been had he packed the family along with a couple of men into a cheaper room and failed in making both ends meet. Day by day I became convinced that not only it is unwise, but it is criminal for the people of the abyss to marry. They are astounded by the bill they rejected. There is no place for them in the social fabric, while all the forces of society drive them downward till they perish. At the bottom of the abyss they are feeble, besotted, and imbecile. If they reproduce, the life is so cheap that perforce it perishes of itself. The work of the world goes on above them, and they do not care to take part in it, nor are they able. Moreover, the work of the world does not need them. There are plenty, far fitter than they, clinging to the steep slope above, and struggling fanatically to slide on more. In short, the London abyss is a vast shambles, year by year, and decade by decade. Rural England pours in a flood of vigorous, strong life, that not only does not renew itself, but perishes by the third generation. Competent authorities avert to the London workman, whose parents and grandparents were born in London, is so remarkable a specimen that he is rarely found. Mr. A.C. Peugeot has said that the aged poor and the residuum which compose the submerged tenth constitute 7.5% of the population of London, which is to say that last year and yesterday and today, at this very moment, 450,000 of these creatures are dying miserable at the bottom of a social pit called London. As to how they die, I shall take an instance from this morning's paper. Self-neglect. Yesterday, Dr. Ian Westcott held an inquest at Shoreditch respecting the death of Elizabeth Cruz, aged 77 years, of 32 East Street, Holborn, who died on Wednesday last. Alice Matheson stated that she was landlady of a house where deceased lived. Witness last saw her live on the previous Monday. She lived quite alone. Mr. Francis Burke, living officer to the Holborn district, stated that deceased had occupied the room in question for 35 years. When witness was called on the first, he found the old woman in a terrible state, and the ambulance and coachman had to be disinfected after the removal. Dr. Chase Fennell said death was due to blood poisoning from bad soreness, due to self-neglect and filthy surroundings, and the jury returned a verdict to that effect. The most startling thing about this little incident of a woman's death is the smug complacency with which the officials looked upon it and rendered judgment. That an old woman of 70 years of age should die of self-neglect is the most optimistic way possible of looking at it. It was the old dead woman's fault that she died, and having located the responsibility, society goes contentedly on about its own affairs. Of the submerged tenth, Mr. Peugeot has said, either through lack of bodily strength, or of intelligence, or of fibre, or of all three, they are inefficient or unwilling workers and consequently unable to support themselves. They are so often degraded in intellect as to be incapable of distinguishing their right from their left hand, or of recognizing the numbers of their own houses. Their bodies are feeble and without stamina, their affections are warped, and they scarcely know what family life means. 450,000 is a whole lot of people. The young fireman was only one, and it took him some time to say his little say. I shouldn't like to hear them all talk at once. I wonder if God hears them.